All right, so if you could just raise your hand, if you were here yesterday. I mean, I know your names, but if you were here yesterday, raise your hand. Okay. And then new people that were not here yesterday, raise your hand, just so I can get a sense for who was not here yet. Okay, cool. Okay, fabulous. Okay, let's rock and roll. Well, I'm excited to see everybody again. As you know, I'm Samantha, and I'll provide a brief introduction again for people that don't were not here yesterday. But this is day 2 of the Feminist Leadership Formula. Today, we're going to be focusing on your intrinsic power map and what that even means and what I'm talking about, and thinking about power. So, as I mentioned before, I'm Samantha. Let me just share my screen. Okay. As you come into the chat, just in case you were not here yesterday, or even if you were, just a brief introduction of yourself in the chat. Who are you? Organization you work at, your LinkedIn profile if you would like to connect with people, since your network is your net worth. And we need to, as women, to build our networks as much as possible in order to support one another and rival the stupid old boys club that bothers me and everybody else here. All right, let me just share my screen. Okie dokie. Can see my screen? Thumbs up. Okay, great. So today is your intrinsic power map. Most of you were here yesterday, but just briefly in case you weren't. I am an international speaker on leadership and women's issues, working on 3 different books about feminist leadership, your intrinsic power, and creating and fostering change, because that's what I care about and what I'm invested in. I also was a fellow. The background behind me is Bellagio, Italy. The Rockefeller Foundation has this amazing fellowship for thought leaders, thinkers, kind of people pushing against the mold. And I was privileged to be there for a month working on my leadership book. With some Nobel Prize winners and Pulitzer Prize winners. I rarely experience imposter syndrome, but let me tell you, being on a fellowship with people who were nominated for the Nobel Prize, I cannot tell you how to get rid of that imposter syndrome, because that was there for me for the first time in a long time. It was crazy. So I also am the CEO of Empower Global. We are a full-scale leadership development company that does everything from diagnostics to understand, a company might come to us and say, hey, we have a bunch of middle managers. We want to provide professional development and leadership. We have no idea what to do. And then myself and Meg, who's our head of design, will go in and do a bunch of surveys, focus groups, et cetera, to understand what the landscape is, what the gaps are, what the strengths are of people, and custom design accelerator programs that are usually a combination of live classes, coaching, retreats, all sorts of things to be able to develop those leaders in a way that's backed by research and neuroscience. So that's the Empower Global. And then I host the Women's Leadership Challenge, which you all are going to learn about today if you don't know about it already. And we've got a couple Women's Leadership Challenge alums on here, Leslie, Meg, Kaisha. I think I might have seen a couple others as well. So they can also give you their 2 cents on the Women's Leadership Challenge. So that's who I am. And I also host a podcast called Samanthropolitics, which is a podcast to lift women's voices in foreign policy and provide a feminist lens on global issues. So that's me. Just some of our clients: Monday, Aspida, AB and Bev, Department of Homeland Security, Wilson Center. All right, to go back into the agenda, and yesterday I know I screwed it up, so I made sure it was correct today. So we have today's intrinsic power. Tomorrow we're looking at what is feminist leadership. What exactly does that mean? How is it different from feminine leadership or women's leadership, which is often asked? We're going to talk to Mariana Diaz-Kraus on Thursday about becoming a change maker and how do you become a change leader. Friday application. Lori is going to lead our session on becoming superwoman using artificial intelligence. A feminist leadership roundtable with Ivka and Garima, coaching with me on Monday, and then high performance coach Dominique Narciso, also a WLC alum, who is like the most energetic person I've ever met in my life and will amp you up to do your absolute best next year. And the schedule on Friday and Saturday is now changed on this slide. It was wrong yesterday. It is 1 to 2 on Friday and Saturday is 1 to 2 Eastern, not 12 to 1 Eastern. Okay. So, actually, before I get to this slide, I'd just love to know for the people that were here yesterday, anything come up for you? And you feel free to put it in the chat or come off you. Anything with awareness, this is being recorded and streamed. So that's not the norm. Anything come up for you as you were thinking about yesterday or any new insights after or after you watched the recording? Anything come up for you that you want to share? Please put it in the chat or feel free to come off mute in whichever way you're comfortable with. Anything come up for anyone? Okay, yeah, that women are often considered activists and not leaders. Low levels of progress. Yeah, we've progressed in many ways, but unfortunately, with progress, there's always backtrack because of backlash. And that's part of what we have to push against is the waves of coming forward and feeling like we're 10 steps forward, and all of a sudden the wave hits us and we're 3 feet back. Then we have to swim back out and go back and keep going, which can be really frustrating. Anything else? And for those who weren't here yesterday, we really talked about um, Meg, I'm going to make you co-host so you can let people in so I don't get distracted anymore. Um, what we talked about yesterday was basically looked at the global gender gap report. We also looked at the McKinsey Women in the Workplace report and really looked at what are the structures that are holding women back and what is the status of women in the world right now with according to the gender gap. We also kind of looked at what is coming down the pike. So what can we expect in the Trump administration coming in and what I mean, unfortunately, a lot of things we can't expect, but we have to, how do we arm ourselves for what's coming in an administration that has expressed a lot of views that are hostile to gender equality, DEI, ESG, a lot of progressive ideas. So that's what we did talk about yesterday. It sounds like Alexa would be a good person to. Hey, Alexa, don't mean to put you on the spot, but somebody who does civil liberties oversight. Do you have any insight on just thoughts about civil liberties in the next 4 years that you might want to share with us?
Just generally speaking, or sorry, I was pulled away for a second.
No, no, just I mean, thinking about the next 4 years, especially in America, from a civil liberties perspective, what are some of the things that you're thinking about?
Um, I mean, my work is mostly focused on reviewing counterterrorism programs within the federal government for privacy and civil liberties concerns. We're really just on the lookout for different issues and or potential programs or focus that the new administration um, uh, I guess would focus on in the coming years. I think a big thing that everybody's talking about now is AI and related issues, and I could definitely see some potential privacy and or civil liberties impacts as relates to that. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's, mainly I think for that's mainly our focus.
Yeah, thank you, Alexa. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot, just
Oh, no,
happened to
you're
see
fine.
your message. And I think AI, you're right, is a minefield we're walking into of intellectual property rights, whilst appreciating the benefit it can have. But you know, and we're so slow to catch up with tech companies in terms of regulations that a lot of harm can be done before we catch up to the harm and regulate that harm. And yesterday I mentioned, speaking of terrorism, this bill that passed the House, that's bound for the Senate. That's the Stop Terrorism Financing Act that could shut down nonprofit organizations with little due process. So those are some of the things that we spoke about yesterday. Alexa, sorry, did you want to comment on that? I saw you come off mute for a second.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's a very interesting, for me personally, that's a very interesting topic as well. So that's something me as an attorney that I'm paying attention to, not to say, on behalf of P Club that we are, but yeah, very interesting.
Cool. We'll have to talk about that. I'll have an article out like next week, I think, in New Lines magazine about it. But I'd love to chat with you about it offline.
Amazing. Sounds good.
Yay. Okay, so let's see. Anything else? Somebody said low levels of progress. Someone said something about intersectionality, intersectional perspective. Um, yeah, it's Julia. Do you want to expand a little bit more on that?
I come from being a Jewish American autistic leader, and I feel like I always pick up on when people have consideration to the impact of identity on leadership. So, just your comments throughout the hour yesterday really showed me that you put yourself in the shoes of various people, and I just really admire that. And I think this room is a reflection of that as well. So, I'm really happy to be here and I like to just learn from everyone's perspective, especially when we can bring our identities and lived experience to the table. So thank you.
Thanks, Julia. I appreciate that. That means a lot to me as somebody who really cares about not coming at things just from a Western American perspective and my identities. And that also really relates to our topic today, your intrinsic power map, which really is about figuring out how do you bring all of the pieces of you to your leadership style while knowing sometimes that threatens people, but also knowing that we need all of you, and not to copy what's out there because it's so important that these intersectional identities are expressed and not repressed because that's what creates I don't know, the beauty of the world, frankly. So thank you for that, Julia. Okay, so let's keep moving here. And Meg, I made you co-host. If you could let people in when you see them in the waiting room, that would be great. Okay, so when we think about power, and so in the Women's Leadership Challenge, the second class is called Deconstructing Your Inner Patriarchy. And I came up with that title because I was in Bellagio. The first time I was in Bellagio, Italy, I brought a group of gender equality activists who were all fellows for Ashoka, which is a nonprofit that supports cool women, cool social entrepreneurs. And I brought them together in Italy for this conference and convening on what is women's leadership, how do women change systems differently. And I'll never forget when somebody said, I feel like we've just been swimming in this tainted water. And this water is telling us the way that we're supposed to be, and it just influences us into becoming less than our full selves because it's around masculine norms and masculine identities. And so I really loved this quote from a book about women in leadership. And I think that this water really is the patriarchal norms that are teaching us to act and be a certain way that doesn't threaten the current structure and system of power, which obviously benefits some and doesn't benefit others. So this quote on the screen really struck me a lot. Sonia, do you want to read this out for us?
Sure. Institutional and interpersonal processes preserving an oppressive status quo count on our cooperation by calling forth deeply internalized messages and self in relation schemas in which we deserve reprimand or preserve polite silence or focus on our imperfections or feel shamed deeply by our mistakes.
Sonia, that was beautifully read. Thank you. Uh, some of those words are really powerful. Like what words stand out to you? Can put it in the chat. What words kind of strike you as you look at that?
I love words and the self in relation schemas. I could probably talk about that for the entire hour.
Good, Julie. Well, I would love to know more when we have more time. So self-in-relation schemas, these ideas and identities, polite silence, right? That, I always joke that if women could get rid of one word that really limits us, it's this word perfect, that we're trying to fit into this perfect norm, but nobody really knows what perfect is. And sometimes perfect is not speaking up, being polite, being humble, not, bragging about yourself, not putting yourself out there. But those are actually the things, especially in Western society, that actually bring you the rewards. This idea of imperfections. And I really operate as a coach from a strengths-based framework that, yes, you have to know where you're weak, but if you focus all the time on where you're weak, you're just going to be trying to do the thing you're bad at all the time. Instead of, if you focus in on where you're really good, that's where you really soar. That's where you really excel. And yes, you try to plug in those gaps, but you can also delegate some of those sometimes. And so, where does this come from? And I'm going to come back to that. This was twice. Where does our self-concept come from, right? Where do these norms come from? And it comes from all different sources. Our parents or whoever took care of us, our religion, or maybe not even our religion, but for example, America is very much within still within puritanical norms, Christian norms, even though we supposedly have a separation of church and state. Our culture, what our socioeconomic class was, the media, and the media within our individual country, and what that, what does that say about women? How many women? I still hate Big Bang Theory. I'm like, why is the smart guy like the main character? He's like this. It's always like smart dude scientist. Like, where's like the smart female scientist? Are romantic partners. And many people, as a weird byproduct of the Women's Leadership Challenge that I wasn't expecting, got divorces or left toxic partners who, gaslit them into feeling like they weren't good enough or they weren't smart enough or whatever that was. Our industry, and especially, I get a lot of women in the Women's Leadership Challenge from male-dominated industries because women are often sidelined, often thought, kind of gaslit again to feel like their opinion doesn't matter or isn't right, or their opinion is stolen by a man who then puts it forward and says it's his, and they start to feel like they're crazy because they knew that was their idea. And also all of the isms, racism, ageism, classism, xenophobia, prejudice, etc. All of these things influence how we feel about ourselves. And that's the water that I'm talking about that we swim in. And sometimes we don't even realize it and we feel less than, and or imposter syndrome, as I mentioned earlier, and think it's somehow our fault. But it's really that we're swimming in this kind of tainted water that has taught us these norms that preserve us in polite silence or cause us to focus on imperfections or make us feel as if we're not worthy, if we're not perfect. Ableism, absolutely. So this is where our self-concept come from. And let's come back to that later. And this forms what we call our self-concept. And again, we dig more into this in the Women's Leadership Challenge. But self-concept is what the beliefs that we hold to be true about ourselves. Our self-esteem is how much do we approve of that self-concept of ourselves? So do we feel good about this conceptual framework we've made of ourselves? And then how much we love ourselves then based on our self-esteem. So and this gets into the weeds a little bit of psychological stuff, but often, women can have one piece of themselves that really matters or is called out that can disproportionately affect self-esteem. For example, for me growing up, my weight, right? Didn't matter how good I was in school or how many A's I got, or if I was the lead of the play in the president of student council. I gained 5 pounds. Somehow nothing mattered, right? These little things. I actually have not weighed myself in 15 years, and I'm so much happier since. But these little things that society tells us are so important, being a woman, can totally take away all of those other things. So I'd love to ask you in the chat if you could think for a second, because we focus often so much on what's bad. What is one thing that you are really proud of? What is one thing in your life that you've accomplished that you are proud of? You can put it in the chat. Something you're really proud of. master's from a top university. I know this is a question I'm throwing at you. I'm stopping my share for a second. Ooh, Carmen, beautiful. Prioritize my destiny over my history. That is like beautifully and hauntingly said. Learning to accept and value my dyslexia. Thanks, Anna. As a neurodivergent person, I have also gone that route, and it's been hard, but to appreciate where it gives you your superpowers, as much as society can diminish us. Discovering who I am and creating my own authentic path. Beautiful. Got it from Oprah. Everyone gets an iPad. Amazing. A single mom who's raised an incredible and independent young man. Beautiful, Beth. I'm so much admiration for single mothers. I can barely take care of my cat. Um, Strong relationships and teams. And I know this is an awkward thing to ask you all. This is awkward to say, what is one of your biggest accomplishments? Because we often don't pat ourselves on the back and we don't think about that. And we're always focused on what we didn't do well enough, or we didn't do good enough, or what we could have done better, or why we couldn't get there. And one of the things that I really want you to think about is really valuing your own accomplishments. And I always say, if you don't own your accomplishments, no one else will. If you don't own your accomplishments, no one else will. No one else is going to be out there bragging about you and talking about your accomplishments. And if it's your mom, that's awkward at this age, right? That doesn't feel good if it's the only person there is your mom besides you, because that's usually what it is. And, you know, that's so incredibly important. And so in the Women's Leadership Challenge, right, we go through your accomplishments, and we also go through something which I call your resilience arsenal. And what I call your resilience arsenal is also looking at the things, and I'm not going to have you do this publicly right now, but all of the things in your past that you've overcome, all of those hardships, all of those circumstances that, seemed insurmountable at the time, where you got yourself together or you relied on resources, you got your toolkit out of your therapist and your parents and your friends and your yoga and whatever, and you're reading, and you got it together and you were able to go through that. And what does that say about you? And knowing what that resilience arsenal is to then equip you in the future for the things that life throws at us. So that's the first part. The second part is deconstructing your inner patriarchy. And again, in the Women's Leadership Challenge, we really dive into, what did your parents say to you about what it meant to be a woman? And there's little norms like, did your mom work outside the home? Did she enjoy her job? Did you have a mother growing up? There's little things that can influence you, especially as a young woman, that are often cemented into us that we don't even realize is there. A lot of shame around sexuality as women. And especially if you're American, in like a very puritanical society, around sex, around abortion, around all these taboo things that just make women feel bad about themselves. I think the Me Too movement was so powerful because it finally said, this is not the fault of women. This is not your fault if you are assaulted or abused. This is the fault of the perpetrator. And to see how widespread that was, and how much shame exists, and how much shame can really hold you back from reaching that full potential. So after years and years of coaching, when I started coaching, I joke, well before I was qualified to coach, when I was in my early 20s, I started to realize that all of the affirmations didn't work. Putting your hand on your hips and saying, I'm amazing. Okay, it feels good for a second. But ultimately, when we think about confidence, what is so critical is really what Julia said before, is understanding who you are. It is understanding all the facets that make you you. And one thing that happens with young women is that often women are defined in relation to their community they're not defined by their individual self. So they're not taught who are they as individuals. Whereas boys, there's a much more of a focus on individuality. So one of the things that I started to do just kind of instinctually as a coach, and also I have to thank my mom as being a psychologist, so she definitely clued me into some of this, was to start to do all these assessments for people to help them figure out who they are and what are all the aspects that make you you. So this is what's called your intrinsic power map. Actually, let's go here first. Here is as we think about some of the things that make you you, and Julia's brought up identity a few times. There are so many aspects of what can make you you, right? Your family status, if your disability, your ethnicity, your appearance, your values, your religion, are you an introvert or an extrovert? There's so many aspects of you that make you you. And often we spend a lot of our lives masking some of those because they're not accepted in our current workplace or society or town or environment or high school or whatever that is. And I'm here to try to bring out all of you and to celebrate all of what you are because we need that in the world right now, desperately, like so badly, in a world where Zuckerberg is calling for more aggression. I don't even, I'm lost. Uh, so in the Women's Leadership Challenge, and I'm trying to give some stuff for you now. We do what's called, this is what I kind of came up with after years and years and years of coaching. Thinking about, what is your personality? So what are the top aspects of your personality that make you you? Are you funny, smart, cool, interesting, dynamic? Your values. And so we do an assessment in the Women's Leadership Challenge to try to come down to what your top values are. I'm very much a prescriber to values-based leadership. Again, speaking of stupid Mark Zuckerberg, today I was complaining, or not complaining, but really commenting on how, ending fact checking just is clearly a lack of values-based leadership. And somebody who doesn't have strong moral and ethical values because he cares more about money and cozying up to Trump than he does about his own values or leaving a positive legacy on the world. Uh, your quirks, so the silly things that make you you, right? If you laugh like the nanny or whatever that is, right? Those little things that people would say, "Oh, I love when you do this," or "I love how people always tell me, I make delicious food, but it always looks terrible, but I'm able to put all these different things, together that somehow taste delicious, but it always looks bad." Uh, your special talents. Let's pause here for a second. What are some special talents in the room? You can put it in the chat. Are you a musician? Are you a runner? Are you any special talents in the room? Cook, musician, and speed reader. Love it, Katie. Singer. Beautiful. Non-localized intelligence. Julia, what does that mean? I hate to keep putting you on the spot. What does non-localized intelligence mean? Like you know a lot about a lot of things?
I'd suggest to anybody interested to understand non-localized intelligence to listen to the telepathy tapes and just learn about the concept of psi and the ability to do things like remote viewing or some of the psychic abilities that we don't always have scientific proof for, but are really the aspects of our consciousness that we just don't tap into. So I'm passionate about opening up that dialogue as well. So I'm glad that that's new vocabulary.
And thanks, Julia, for pointing that out. And something that you raised that I think is really important here is how do you bring those talents to the work that you do? And I was coaching somebody who is also a classically trained musician, which is my background. and realizing that one of the things as a facilitator that I'm great at is energy, feeling energy. Because when you grow up with singing, you have to anticipate breath and you have to listen like as faint, like to the faintest sound to be able to then glide into the next verse of the song. And I realized that was something that came from my background that wasn't what I necessarily do now, but that helps me where I am today. And I'm actually thinking now about to tell you all for the first time, but a keynote speech, because I do a lot of keynotes, where I'm going to combine singing the beginning of an operatic aria with the keynote about authentic leadership and then ending with the end of the aria. Because I really want to bring, again, like how do you bring all these aspects of yourself to what you do now, right? Because that's the stuff people want. They don't want the normal, cookie cutter stuff, right? But we often suppress those pieces of ourselves. So special talents, identity aspects, like we were just talking about, strengths. Even if you don't end up in the Women's Leadership Challenge, I love Gallup Strengths 2.0. I think it's great. I've used it with clients for years. I highly suggest it. And I suggest if you do Gallup Strengths that you actually start with the one that's cheaper, the one that's $25, not the one that's 50, because the one that's 50 is really overwhelming because it has too much. It's just too overwhelming. But the Gallup top 5 strengths, it just gives you your top 5. And then you can tell whether you're more of a relationship builder, an executor, an ideator, a strategic thinker. And that gives a lot of clarity to people. And again, in the Women's Leadership Challenge, we talk about strengths-based leadership. And yes, it's the same as StrengthsFinders. That is a Gallup product. So yeah, in the Women's Leadership Challenge, we have a whole class on strengths-based leadership. And then how do you manage people with different strengths and put together a team according to these different categories of relationship builder, execution, strategic thinking, et cetera. So this is your intrinsic power map. And this is not easy, right? Like if I told you to fill this thing out right now, it's not going to take 2 seconds. Like, these are things that you need to understand over time. Like values, is a constant process. Personality, these are things that take a while to really kind of identify. And then also not just to identify with, but how do you then utilize them? How do you apply them? Are you using them? A lot of people have unrealized strengths that are sitting there that they're really good at, but they've been working in this job for, I'll give you an example. So for people who are really good at execution, they often get put in execution-based jobs because they're really good at what I call GSD, getting stuff done. But they actually might be a brilliant strategic thinker, but because they're such a good executor, they're always given execution jobs and they never tap into the strategic thinking part. But actually, if you're a strategic thinker and an executor, that is like that is CEO material, like right, left, and center, right? And if you can, like, are you leveraging those strengths in the way you can, or are you just being pigeonholed into the same things over and over again because you're good at them, but you have these other things that are unrealized potential that you could then, take you up to the next level. So on this note, I would like to bring in a Women's Leadership Challenge alum to talk a little bit about her journey with intrinsic power, my bestie, Lakaisha. So I'm going to stop my share, and I just want to give you a little bit of information about her. She brings over 30 years of demonstrated leadership excellence in customer care, call center operations, enterprise strategy, and process improvement. Her extensive career spans leadership roles at major telecom companies such as Cablevision, Verizon, and Cox. She's also led teams in marketing, education, and promotional distribution industries. She has relocated and redesigned call center operations, implemented process improvement frameworks, and spearheads employee recognition programs that foster a culture of belonging. She was also the head of the women's ERG at Cox. She's gotten tons of awards. She has a BA and an MBA and certificates in diversity and inclusion. And she is currently, actually, I didn't even know this. I didn't know you were currently pursuing a doctorate in business administration. That's new. I love that. And she also, one of the things that was so cool to see after Lakaisha was in the Women's Leadership Challenge was writing her memoir, The Strength of Silk, which is beautiful and really details what a just what a resilient person you are and a lot of the lessons you've taken. So I'd like to, give the floor over to you for 5 or so minutes to kind of talk a little bit about your journey.
Hi, everyone. So forgive me, I am fighting a cold. I've had this cold for almost a week now, but I'm coming out on the other side. So I am grateful for that. So as Samantha mentioned, my life hasn't always been easy. And if you were to take time to read my book, one of the things you will find out is that I grew up in foster care. And part of that was due to the death of my twin sister at the hands of a stranger. And when Samantha talks about the things that we tell ourselves or the things that other people tell us about ourselves, growing up in foster care, I took on the beliefs of others about who I am and who I should be. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s, I'm in my 50s now, and I joined the Women's Leadership Challenge in my 40s with Samantha and an amazing group of women in our cohort. And Samantha helped me to unpack some of those things that I was holding on to. She also made me get real with myself and sit in those moments of places that I didn't want to sit in because it was uncomfortable. But in order to make it through the program and really understand where she was going and what she was trying to get us to see and realize, I had to sit in it. And it wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. Earlier, when you talked about speaking on our accomplishments, I was never one to brag about the things that I did. And oftentimes, other people got credit for it, right? And so in the class, we unpacked some situations where maybe that had happened, or how did we approach announcing our accomplishments. And it was so interesting because in the same way it took you all the time to actually put something in the chat, that was the awkward silence that we had in our cohort because we're not always used to bragging on ourselves, right? So I was watching the chat to see how quickly would someone post their accomplishment. And it's not uncommon for there to be a hesitation. But what you will learn from the Women's Leadership Challenge that Samantha mentioned is if you don't do it, who will, right? And be you. Everyone else is taken, right? So just sit in who you are and be okay with that. And then I'll stop here with the values conversation. So until speaking with Samantha about identifying what my core values were, I would often accept new roles, knowing I didn't even want to be in it. I would often accept to be on boards that I didn't have interest in. Someone would come to me for something that wasn't even in my wheelhouse, and I'd be like, sure, I'll take it, right? And once I really was able to identify my values, that stopped. A perfect example is I was in a conversation with my leader, and the comment was, oh, yeah, Lakeisha, we know you have aspirations to be a vice president. And in the past, I would have been like, yeah, I do. Oh, my goodness, yes. And in this moment, my values showed up. My values was knocking on my shoulder like, wait a minute. You want to be a VP, but you don't want to be a VP in this position that he's talking about. And so you need to speak up about that. And one of the things that I reflected on is that the values of the person that I would be reporting to didn't align well with me. With respect being top on my values. And when that conversation happened, I stood 10 toes down and firm that no, I'm not interested. That was 2 years ago. But the person that I would be reporting to, unfortunately, their values don't align with mine. And my husband always tells me the quickest way to get hired is to get fired. To get fired is to get hired. And so I knew if I had accepted that I probably would have been putting myself in a situation that wouldn't have been good for me because I knew that my values did not align with this person. So Samantha, I'll stop there in case you have any other questions.
Yeah, like Kaisha, I think that's so important, that values alignment that we often forget. I'm wondering too with you, one of the things when you came into the Women's Leadership Challenge, you told me that somebody had said that you didn't have enough executive presence. And I remember when I talked to you the very first time and I said, this woman has so much presence. I have no idea what is happening here. And you know, what what was your experience, especially as a woman of color in the workplace, right? Understanding the difference between feedback that's based in discrimination and fighting against that versus actual feedback to learn from. And how do you navigate?
Yeah. So um, I think for me, it was really trying to understand what did that mean, right? And so I didn't let up on asking the questions. Well, what does that mean? Can you give me an example? And in the moments where examples couldn't be provided, I respectfully asked that they stop using that phrase when they described me because they weren't able to share specifically what about my executive presence meant that I couldn't take it to the next level. What I later found out, Samantha, and we ended up unpacking this in one of your sessions, was that I was told that I was too much. I was way too much. My energy, I'm always positive. That was making people uncomfortable. And so I began looking for external validation from the people that I knew were probably the ones saying it. And it did me no good because it made me sick because I was trying, I was like a hamster in a wheel. I was just trying to prove myself and be perfect for someone else's definition of what too much looks like. And so it was in that moment when it surfaced, it was right in the moment when we was in the classes. And, Samantha told me point blank, she says, Lakeisha, don't listen to them people. She said, listen, you are who you are, and people navigate towards you because of who you are. And don't change that for anyone else who's uncomfortable because maybe they aspire to do the things that you're doing. I even had one of my leaders say to me, you sure post a lot on LinkedIn. Imposter syndrome came in and stopped posting. And then I had Samantha knocking on my shoulder. What are you doing? Why you stop posting? Who cares? Right? Scroll on. If you don't want to read it, keep scrolling. So I think that it's important that when you go, if you decide, and I highly encourage that you decide to sign up for this Women's Leadership Challenge, you will learn so much about yourself, but also you will be given resources. And I appreciate real talk, and Samantha will give you real talk. And you get to be your authentic self truly amongst the women in your cohort. And you also kind of blend in with some of the other cohorts based on the program that she has so that you get to hear from other women as well.
Lakeisha, thank you so much. And I really like that um asking for examples, right? And realizing like when there aren't examples there, like, one thing in DEI training is, always avoiding when somebody says they have a gut feeling about hiring somebody. Like, like stop the brakes. What does a gut feeling mean? It's usually, because people don't understand their own biases, and why they do those things. Does anyone have any, questions for Lakeisha? You can raise your hand or put it in the chat. And if not right now, you can feel free to put the part. Does someone have a question?
I'm still a work in progress.
All right.
But I will tell you that I'm leveraging the tools that Samantha, and when we talked about me joining this session today, I went back in the trenches and I found my notes and I started reading through it and I was like, yeah, this is it. This is it. Oh yeah, I forgot all about this one. And so I started to pull out some things that I know will serve me well. I have moved on from an organization and now work at another company. And I'm really looking to do some really amazing things there as well. But it's a work in progress. It never stops. You never stop learning. You never stop growing. And you have to be open to sitting in those uncomfortable spaces so that you can get on the other side of it, to truly live in your authenticity,
Oh,
and then not care. At the end of the day, you live this life, no one else.
yeah, absolutely, Lakeisha. Um, Thank you so much. Lakeisha, thank you so much for sharing with us.
Can I
Any,
say one thing, Samantha?
yeah, yeah, please.
So, Jennifer, give your imposter syndrome a name, okay? And when she shows up, tell her to go to hell away, okay? Give her a name. Look, Thelma, I need you to go somewhere, okay? Give it a name, because once you name it, then you have control over it. Give her a name and then tell her to go somewhere.
Thank you, Lakeisha. And that's a good coaching tip generally to have also like your negative voice too, to give it like a name of someone that you really can't stand and just say, I had a coach that, you have your kind of the negative voice on your shoulder, and then you have also like the positive voice, and you give that one a name. You can give it Samantha if you want. I'll compliment me. And you have that other one on your shoulder, and you're able to say to kind of to uh, distance yourself
Mhm.
from the site. It's called psychological distancing, to kind of
Yeah.
separate yourself from yourself and be able to kind of get rid of that nasty voice.
Yeah.
The last thing I would say too that I think is really important for Lakeisha, and another exercise that I would recommend is called it's your leadership story, right? That one thing about Lakeisha that I love is like your story of foster care and cancer and going through all of this hardship, really influence the way that you lead, who you are, your own realizations about yourself. And there's a leadership expert named Doug Conan, who I've had the pleasure of getting trained by. And he started his leadership journey by writing 40 pages about like his entire journey up till now. And if I ever work with you one-on-one, like executive coaching, we're going to do some serious life story exercises to really try to understand who you are, where you've been, what are the habits and behaviors, what do you stand for, et cetera. And often we don't take that time to go into our past. So I'll just give you that as another tool. So as Lakeisha mentioned, this is the time where I do tell you a little bit more about the Women's Leadership Challenge and what that entails for people that do want more of a deep dive. If you don't, that's okay. Like I said, I'm doing these sessions because I really I want to go beyond just like all the women that typically do the Women's Leadership Challenge. But if you are interested in the Women's Leadership Challenge, I do want to tell you a little bit more about it because let me share my screen again, because we're starting cohorts in February. So I have a cohort in DC and also a cohort that's virtual. The cohort in DC, they're both held after work, like after work hours, so that you're able to attend. But so just a little bit more information on the Women's Leadership Challenge, if that's a journey that you feel like pursuing and feel like these classes are always too short, because I feel like they're too short. So the Women's Leadership Challenge, after teaching it for 4 years, I actually realized what I was doing was taking women through what I call transformational leadership development for women. And that involves deconstruction, which we started to do today, which is really deconstructing your past, diving into that past, coming up with your resilience arsenal. What is your leadership story? What are the things that we do a whole life story exercise that we visualize with artwork to figure out what are those obstacles you've overcome and what does that mean about who you are now, deconstructing your inner patriarchy, and also deconstructing the outer patriarchy. As somebody who did my master's in gender at Fletcher and is kind of a policy wonk, I know a lot about the systems and structures that exist. And it's important that we're knowledgeable, like someone said yesterday, information is power, about all of those aspects of society, and where they exist and how they hold us down and how we rise up against them. And what are some of the solutions that are working. Individualization is the second part. So that's what we started to do today. And that's what the intrinsic power map is all about. It's about understanding who you are, your strengths, your talents, your values, all the things that make you you, and how do you bring those into this world. The third stage is advancement, and advancement might be negotiating a higher salary or getting getting the position that you want or stepping into a CEO role. Um, or it could be, I always say I teach you how to thrive within the current society, but also how to change it. Because the problem with most women's leadership programs, which is why I designed this one, is they operate on the Sheryl Sandberg corporate America exist within the system, but don't recognize that it's totally screwed up and you need to change its system. And I don't prescribe to that, but there are realities that you do need to exist in. And so at the beginning of every class, we do some coaching where someone might come in and say, hey, I'm having this issue, real story, where a guy took a project that I worked on for 2 years and put it on his resume and put it on his LinkedIn and said it was his. What do I do? How do I stand up to that? Or somebody might come in and say, I'm having a personality conflict with people on my team. How do I diffuse conflict? And so I'll walk them through that as a leadership coach. So those are strategies for advancement. And then there's leadership and feminist leadership principles. That's what we're going to be doing tomorrow is feminist leadership principles and what does it mean to be a feminist leader? How do you apply that in order to understand your true north and start creating change in the world? And then the last stage is what I call culture change. And that's where we dive deep into all sorts of social change strategies that you can use to create change, both within your own lives, but also on the social issues that you care about. And that's where I usually bring in speakers like Mariana Diaz-Kraus, who runs Movilizatorio, a civic actions lab, or I had somebody who was responsible for getting maternity leave passed at the federal level. She spearheaded that effort. I've had a woman who's run the World Innovation Prize on her work on human trafficking, Hasina Karbish. She's come in and spoken to cohorts. She's amazing and brilliant. So that's kind of the last step. And then along the way, like Aisha said, I am here to support you. And like Leslie and Meg will say, and kick you in the butt and remind you how great you are when you're getting pushed back down. So you have a couple coaching sessions with me. We also do a full 360 process at the beginning of the course. The 360, I work with TrueScore, and basically you're sending out a survey to your friends, your family, colleagues, subordinates, people above you, and they rate you on all these different leadership qualities. And give you feedback. We look at that together at the beginning of the challenge so that we can try to action plan together with you of what it is you want to work on. You also have a session on finding your purpose and a session on your mission and vision. The other thing that we do, which Lakaisha also mentioned, is networking. So I network you with women in your cohort, with women in other cohorts and also alumni. So you might have you'll say to me, I had a woman who was Kyle. She's great. She has a financial communications company. She wanted to write a book on ESG, investing for individuals, but she didn't really have any context in the ESG space or social investing or the social good space. So I made sure to match her with lots of people in the social good space. And then they benefited from her experience in the private sector, especially if they were trying to get into the private sector. So I do matchmaking for you that's very customized to who you are, what you want to achieve, who I think you might jive with. I've had women end up collaborating on an impact fund for the Amazon rainforest from 2 different cohorts. Women who are still best friends from different cohorts. So that's a really cool aspect of the program as well. So that's the journey. And I also, in terms of bonuses, the cost of the course, it's either $1,000 per month for 12 months or $10,000 upfront. Just during the feminist leadership formula, if you pay in full and you end up registering, and I will say, you can't just register. We have to have an hour call and determine whether it's the right fit for you, whether I think you're the right fit for the community. If you do end up registering, I'm taking another $1,000 off the price of the course, so it ends up being $9,000. And you're getting access to our live public speaking training, which is an extra training I'm going to be doing for people who registered during the Feminist Leadership Formula. So those are some bonuses that are only available during the Feminist Leadership Formula. So during this week and during next week that are available to you for women who do end up deciding that they want to go on a deeper journey. And the cohorts are only 8 women. And there's a lot more of the time. I really, like I said, I don't like talking to you all like so quickly, and I don't like not having enough conversation. So class is 2.5 hours. So, and has way less people so that we can sit and dive into all these things and wrestle with topics. And you can get a lot of individualized coaching, support, and help. It's not an hour of me sitting and talking at you, because I don't think that that works. And the research shows it doesn't. The research on learning actually shows that the best leadership training happens over time with gaps in between versus like a conference where you learn a bunch of stuff, go into cognitive overload and don't apply any of it. So that's part of why I did it this way. The course is held I think the cohort in DC is going to be 6:30 to 9 p.m. Eastern. And the virtual cohort, it depends who's in it, but it'll probably be around the same time, or maybe 7 to 9:30. It depends what time zones people are in. If I have enough people in Europe and Africa who are interested in, I'll do a Europe Africa cohort that's earlier in the day. But we usually try to make it work between everybody in the cohort so that it's that everybody comes together and comes at a time that works for them. Meg, I'm wondering if you could comment on the Women's Leadership Challenge and how it helped you.
Oh, sure. For me, it was life-changing. I mean, for one thing, I was raised by a single dad, and and at a time when that wasn't really done, when dads didn't get custody of the kids. And I kind of didn't, I had trouble like getting close to women. I didn't have a lot of women friends until I was maybe 30. And I've often felt like an outsider in groups of women. And one of the really incredible things that happened was that I really felt like I was part of a community for one of the very few times in my life. So that was amazing. I got to be of I got to be there for a lot of very cool experiences that other people had. I got to be part of their celebrations, which I really loved, and I learned a lot about practical skills that I needed, like networking, something that I was terrible at as kind of a hella introvert. And it really kind of changed my head about networking. So that was really helpful. And then, gosh, there are just so many skills and introductions to incredible women and things that I wanted to know for a long time and didn't hadn't really gotten a hold of how to go about it. So yeah, it was an incredible experience, one of the most transformative experiences of my life. And I would do it again in a second.
Meg, thank you so much. That means so much. And then I hired Meg to be our head of surveys and design at the Empower Global, and she's worked with me with a lot of corporate clients. So I know we're reaching the top of the hour. So I put my Calendly link in the chat. If that's of interest to you, let me know. Just put a time in my calendar. A lot of workplaces will pay for this. So if you do work for a company and you have a professional development budget, or even if you don't, they usually will pay anywhere between a third to the entire thing. So even if you don't feel like you have the money right now, we can talk about ways to get funding from your workplace and or negotiate a higher salary so that it then pays for itself. So that is if that's of interest to you, please book time on my calendar. And tomorrow's topic is feminist leadership principles. So that's we're going to be diving into what does it mean to be a feminist leader? How is it different being a feminine leader, a women leader? How do we actualize that in society today, especially in a world that so desperately needs it, in the hearts of conflict and mass shootings and climate change? I genuinely and deeply believe that we need feminist leaders. So let's just close out tonight with insights like we did last night. Are there any insights? What's your biggest, and if you have to drop, please drop what's your biggest insight from today's session? What's your biggest insight? Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, you don't need to change. Thanks, Shiva. Beautiful. Feedback is relative and socially constructed. Be you, everyone else is taken. Live authentically, be yourself, diverse, and it's okay to be proud of yourself. Beautiful. Yeah. And we need to be our own mouthpieces, and we also need to be each other's mouthpiece, or not mouthpieces. We also need to celebrate each other's accomplishments, and part of the Women's Leadership Challenge. And I just, women spend far too much time putting each other down or gossiping. The number of women I've coached who have been destroyed by other women at work, especially women above them, is really troubling to me, and shouldn't happen. And we really also need to celebrate each other as much as we can and showcase and shine the light on one another as well. Like I said yesterday, we hold hands and what is that game called? I can't even what is it called? Why am I losing the name of this game? Rover Rover, is that what is it called? Oh my gosh, can't remember. So anyway,
Red Rover.
thank you, Red Rover. If we hold our hands together in Red Rover, we're much more likely to be to be stronger together. Uh, and Leslie, what's the pink ceiling?
Okay, good evening. I'll be brief, which is sometimes hard for me to do. It is a concept where other women, because you're speaking about it, where other women in the workplace put, women put other women down. So they are preventing you or other women from advancing within the work structure.
Yeah. Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, it's not something that should happen. And I think a lot of times it happens because of their own internalized patriarchy, and not realizing that they're doing exactly what, they thought they watch what men do to get to the top and they decide to copy that. Or they watch other women that have gotten to the top and see that they were Devil Wears Prada style. So they decide they have to copy that to get ahead. I also think the other aspect of that is a scarcity mentality over an abundance mentality. And that part of I'm reading this book on power structures, but part of like liberatory power is embracing an abundance mindset over a scarcity mindset, that there's room for all of us at the top, and the more that we fight for one another, the more room there will be. And so I will leave you all on that note. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. It was a pleasure to see some of you again, and a pleasure to meet some new faces, and hopefully I will see you all again tomorrow. Good night, everyone.